The night sky pressed low over the highway, a heavy sheet of storm clouds threatening to collapse at any moment. A faint rumble rolled across the horizon as Alexander Hayes guided his black Aston Martin down the narrow road, cutting through the quiet outskirts of the city. He should have been celebrating. Hours earlier, he had signed a multi-billion-dollar deal, one that would be splashed across tomorrow's financial headlines, hailed as a strategic masterpiece. His board expected him to retreat to his private villa toast with a glass of expensive scotch and sleep like a man who'd conquered the world. But Alexander felt none of the usual triumph, only exhaustion, and a strange, hollow ache he didn't understand. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, trying to shake off the restless feeling that had stalked him since dusk. Maybe a few days of isolation would fix it. Maybe the mountains, the silence, the detachment from everything. The thought barely formed when the car jolted violently. The headlights flickered. A loud mechanical thud echoed beneath the hood. What the? The dashboard lit up in a cascade of warning signals. The engine gave a final sputter before dying completely, leaving him coasting forward until the car rolled to a reluctant stop by the side of the road. For a moment, Alexander simply stared at the dead dashboard, jaw locked tight. This couldn't be happening. Not tonight. Not to him. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, irritation sparking in his chest. He was a man who managed mergers across continents, who negotiated with sharks and came out unscathed. He did not get stranded. Not in the middle of nowhere. Not in the rain. Not after the most high-profile deal of the quarter. But life apparently had other plans. A soft patter began against the roof, then intensified. The storm broke. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply as the rain hammered down. With the GPS showing no tow truck service available for miles, and the nearest service station flagged just a short distance ahead, he didn't have much of a choice. He pushed the door open and stepped into the downpour. Cold droplets soaked through his expensive suit, almost instantly running down his neck as he hurried along the slick pavement. The dim glow of a single lamp finally came into view, a modest garage tucked between large trees, its windows fogged and its metal shutter half open. It looked like the kind of place locals trusted and travelers ignored. But tonight, Alexander Hayes had no room for preferences. He approached the entrance, rainwater dripping from his coat sleeves, and slid the door upward. The rusty metal groaned king, a clang that cut through the storm. And then he saw her. She stood near the hood of an old pickup truck, hair cascading around her shoulders in long, dark waves, thick, textured curls that shimmered under the yellow glow of the overhead bulbs. Her skin was a warm, rich brown, smooth and luminous, even beneath the harsh workshop lighting. She wore a fitted navy jumpsuit, dusted with grease sleeves, rolled up to her elbows, exposing toned arms marked with faint smudges from hours of hands-on work. Her eyes, deep, impossibly dark, lifted to him. They were steady, observant, almost searching. Not impressed, not intimidated, not curious about who he was. Just present. "Rough night?" she asked. Her voice was low, husky, in a way that made heat bloom in his chest. Alexander felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. He tried to answer, but the words tangled somewhere between his mind and mouth. "My car," he finally managed, clearing his throat. "It died. A few miles back." Well, she closed the hood of the pickup, wiped her hands on a cloth tucked at her waist, and walked toward him with unhurried confidence. "At least you made it here before the storm got worse." Lightning flashed behind her, illuminating the outline of her figure. Strength, grace, something else he couldn't name. She stopped a few steps away. "Let me guess. Engine trouble, electrical failure. Or did your dashboard decide to throw a tantrum?" He blinked. Something like that. She smirked. I can take a look. I'm Amina, by the way. Amina. He repeated the syllables, soft rolling oddly naturally off his tongue. He had been in countless rooms filled with powerful people, yet none of their names lingered with this kind of echo. I'm Al. But she cut him off casually. I'm sure you'll tell me your name eventually. For now, get in. You're soaked. Her dismissal wasn't rude. It was simply uninterested in everything except the immediate problem. And for someone like him, someone used to seeing awe, calculation, or ambition in people's eyes, her indifference was disarming. He followed her inside, suddenly aware of the rainwater puddling beneath him. Amina tossed him a clean towel and motioned toward a space heater humming softly near a stool. As he dried his hair, she grabbed a set of keys and nodded at the door. Come on, show me the patient. They drove her old truck through the storm until they reached his car. She popped the hood, leaned in without hesitation, and within seconds her brows furrowed in concentration. Even the way she worked was mesmerizing, focused, efficient, and utterly unpretentious. This is going to take a while, she finally said. You'll need to leave it overnight. Alexander should have been annoyed. He should have been furious even. Spending a night in a place like this, without comfort, without privacy, without control, but all he felt was a strange grounding calm. Fine, he said quietly. Whatever you need. She glanced at him, really looked at him for the first time, and something softened in her expression. Don't worry, it's nothing I can't fix. Her confidence stirred something warm in him. Admiration, perhaps, or gratitude, or maybe something deeper he didn't dare name yet. They returned to the garage where she brewed coffee in a small machine near her desk. The aroma filled the space, rich, earthy, comforting in a way he hadn't expected. Here, she said, handing him a steaming mug. Their fingers brushed. A faint shock zipped through him, quick, sharp, electric. Amina didn't react, but he did. His breath hitched, his heart skipped, and in that fleeting contact, something inside him cracked open. He pulled his hand back too quickly. She noticed this time. You're all right, she asked. He nodded, but his pulse was hammering in his ears. This was absurd, irrational, impossible. He didn't react to people. He didn't fall for faces, voices, gestures. He didn't feel anything he couldn't control. He always knew exactly who he was until this moment. As she walked away to grab a diagnostic tablet, he watched her move with effortless precision. The steady rhythm of her steps, the slight sway of her hair, the confidence radiating from her posture, it was all magnetic. Something stirred in him, a pull so strong it startled him, and then it hit him with the force of a crashing wave. Twist, he was falling for her. Instantly, irrevocably, dangerously. He swallowed hard, grappling with the realization. This was more threatening than any hostile takeover or market crash, more destabilizing than any rival CEO, because money could be earned again. Empires rebuilt, deals renegotiated. But this unpredictable, uncontrollable, uninvited surge of emotion, there was no negotiation table for it. No contract, no exit clause. All right, Amina said, snapping him out of his thoughts. She placed the tablet in front of him, unaware of the war raging inside him. I'll run a full check in the morning. For now, you should get some rest. There's a small guest room in the back. Nothing fancy but dry. He stared at her for a heartbeat too long. Thank you, he murmured. His voice sounded unfamiliar, softer, unguarded. She nodded, then turned away to close up the garage for the night. But he stood there rooted, watching her silhouette against the dim light, her quiet strength, her unfiltered authenticity, her warmth in contrast to the cold world he came from. Every part of him knew something undeniable. Meeting her wasn't a coincidence. It was a fracture in fate, a shift in the axis of his carefully controlled life, a breaking point, or a beginning. As he walked toward the back room, Alexander felt the stirring of a storm, far more powerful than the one raging outside. Because for the first time in 32 years, the unshakable, unbreakable Alexander Hayes was afraid. Not of losing control, but of what he would do to keep her once he had fallen this far. Rain drummed steadily against the tin roof of the garage as Amina crouched beside Alexander's car, her curls damp and glistening like a cascade of midnight stars. The storm reflected on the smooth curve of the vehicle, but Alexander barely noticed any of it. His gaze was fixed on her, drawn by a force he couldn't name. She moved with a quiet confidence, her tools clicking rhythmically, her brows knitted in concentration. Every motion seemed to belong to a different rhythm than the chaotic pounding of his heart. "It's bad," she murmured mostly to herself. "You'll need to wait a couple of hours." She didn't look up as she said it, didn't soften her tone to accommodate him, didn't try to cushion the inconvenience. And oddly, that alone steadied him. Alexander wasn't used to waiting on anyone or anything. But here, with rainwater still seeping into the collar of his shirt, and the cool scent of engine oil hanging in the air, impatience simply dissolved. He nodded quietly, not trusting his own voice. Amina stood brushing a strand of wet hair away from her cheek. She grabbed a dry coat from a hook and held it out to him without ceremony. "You'll freeze in that suit. Put this on." He hesitated, surprised by the simple generosity, then slipped into the coat. It fit awkwardly across his broad shoulders, smelling faintly of lavender and steel, a combination that felt unexpectedly comforting. "Come inside," she said. "You should warm up." Alexander followed her into the small break room behind the garage. The contrast struck him immediately. Warm yellow lighting shelves, crowded with mismatched mugs, a kettle humming softly on the counter. The room felt lived in. Real. A place where stories accumulated in layers on the walls. Amina poured steaming tea into 2 ceramic cups, handmade, judging by their imperfect shapes, and handed him one. Their fingers brushed. Again that shock. That lightning bolt that seemed determined to remind him he was not in control. Amina pulled her hand back quickly, almost too quickly. And for the first time since they met, her mask of composure faltered. "You're warmer now," she said, clearing her throat. "Sit." He did, because she asked, and because somehow her voice cut through the restless turmoil inside him. Amina leaned back in her chair, letting the heat seep into her hands as she wrapped them around her own cup. She stared at the rising steam, as though gathering her thoughts. "Machines make more sense than people," she began quietly. "You fix what's broken, replace what's worn. You listen, and they tell you what they need." Alexander watched her. She didn't speak like someone trying to impress him. She spoke like someone who had learned life the hard way. One bolt, one bruise, one victory at a time. "When I was a kid," she continued, "I used to take apart radios just to figure out how they worked. My mother hated it, said girls shouldn't spend their days covered in metal dust." She smiled faintly, then shook her head. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. Her fingers traced the rim of her mug, a habit born of many lonely nights. The thought tugged at something deep in Alexander's chest. "So, I saved every spare dollar," she said softly. "And somehow slowly, I built this garage." Alexander didn't interrupt. If anything, he was afraid to. Her voice had a rhythm he didn't want to break, steady, vulnerable, and strong all at once. He realized, with a kind of quiet awe, that she wasn't just telling him facts. She was revealing pieces of herself. And he listened. Really listened. Not because he felt obligated, not because silence made him uncomfortable, but because Amina's words filled a space inside him he hadn't known was empty. Her determination struck him harder than any financial triumph he'd ever tasted. Her resilience shone brighter than any strategic victory he'd ever orchestrated. This woman had fought for every inch of her life, not for power, not for status, but because passion demanded it. Alexander lowered his gaze, tracing the heat of the mug seeping into his palms. A quiet question lingered in his mind, a sharp, unsettling whisper. What have you ever fought for that wasn't profit or pride? Amina didn't know who he really was. That fact alone made her presence intoxicating. There was no calculation in her eyes, no hidden agenda. She wasn't trying to impress him or manipulate him. She wasn't treating him like a trophy or a stepping stone. She saw him as just a man stranded in the rain. And for someone who had been treated like an asset his entire life, it was disarmingly precious. He lifted his gaze. She was watching him now, curious but respectful of the silence between them. Her eyes held none of the hunger he had come to expect from people who recognized him. Only sincerity. Only calm. It's rare, he said softly, surprising himself. Amina tilted her head. What is someone who builds their life with their own hands? He replied, without shortcuts. She studied him for a moment. Not flattered, not suspicious, simply thoughtful. I didn't have shortcuts to take, she said gently. Alexander felt something stir and ache sharp enough to unbalance him. He wanted irrationally to protect her, to erase whatever had made her say those words so quietly, like a memory she still carried the weight of. Before he could respond, Amina reached across the table to adjust his coat collar. It had slipped slightly, revealing the soaked shirt beneath. The gesture was brief, casual, almost automatic, but when the back of her fingers grazed his skin, warm, soft, steady, a current surged through him, raw and undeniable. His breath stopped in his throat. Amina noticed. She froze her hand, withdrawing instantly. Sorry, she whispered. It's fine. More than fine. Too fine. His lips curved before he could stop them, a small smile, fragile and unfamiliar, tugging at the edge of his mouth. Amina blinked, startled by the expression, as though she had uncovered something he rarely let the world see. And she'd be right. Alexander Hayes did not smile. Not in boardrooms, not in press conferences, not even in moments of victory. But here in a quiet garage, lit by a flickering bulb and scented with engine grease and lavender, he felt something warm unfurling in his chest, something dangerously close to softness. Amina looked away, first clearing her throat, as a faint blush rose across her cheeks. She set her cup down and stood suddenly restless. You should get some rest, she murmured. The storm will last a while. Her avoidance stirred something complicated in him, something that hovered between amusement and longing. She wasn't immune. She felt the spark too. Maybe not fully, not yet, but enough. Enough for her voice to tremble. Enough for her to step back when the air between them grew too charged. Enough for him to glimpse a shy vulnerability behind her steady exterior. A new kind of tension began to form in the small room, quiet, delicate, and undeniably alive. The space seemed to shrink around them, air thickening with unspoken questions neither dared voice. Alexander rose slowly from his seat. Amina. He said her name, grounding him in a way he didn't expect. She turned. For a moment, they simply looked at each other long enough that the hum of the storm seemed to fade, long enough for the world outside to fall away entirely. Something hovered between them. Not a confession too soon, not a touch too risky, but a beginning, a shift, a choice waiting to be made. He felt it first. Then he saw it flicker in her eyes too, and in that suspended breath of a moment, Alexander understood something with unnerving clarity. He didn't just want to stay because his car was broken. He wanted to stay because he was breaking open, breaking free. And somehow, impossibly, Amina was the only person who made the cracks feel safe. Amina wiped her hands on a clean towel and straightened, studying the engine with a thoughtful frown. Alexander stood behind her, pulse unsteady, watching the way her eyes flicked over each part with sharp precision. "Well," she finally said, turning toward him, "your car's not going anywhere tonight." He should have expected that. The failures had been too sudden, too severe. But still the verdict jolted him slightly, because it meant he would not be returning to the isolated villa he'd planned to hide in. Instead, he'd be staying here, in a town lit by warm street lamps, in a garage that smelled of lavender and engine oil, near a woman who made him feel things he had no defenses for. Amina lifted a brow. "You have someone to call? A ride, a private shuttle, maybe?" She said it casually. Not suspicious, just practical. Alexander hesitated. There were a dozen ways he could leave: a helicopter from his private fleet, a car from his security team, a fully staffed service center that would travel to him at the snap of a finger. But every option would burst the fragile bubble he'd somehow stumbled into tonight. A bubble where he wasn't the billionaire with sharp edges and colder walls. A bubble where he was simply a man with rain in his hair, tea warming his hands, and a quiet longing growing in the pit of his chest. So he said the only thing that felt right. "I could stay. If that's not a problem." Amina blinked at him, surprised, and then burst into soft laughter, disbelieving in a way that made her eyes glow. "Most people can't wait to get out of this town," she teased gently. "I'm not most people," he replied before he could stop himself. Her smile faltered for half a second, as if the weight of his words tugged at something inside her. But she turned, grabbed her jacket, and nodded toward the door. "Come on then. There's not much to see at night, but I can show you the parts worth remembering." He followed her into the cool night air, feeling absurdly grateful for the broken car that had forced him into this moment. The storm had quieted. Rain still clung to the leaves, dripping softly into puddles that reflected the honeyed streetlights. The air smelled of earth-warm bread and something sweet he couldn't place. Amina walked beside him, hands in her pockets, curls bouncing lightly with each step. She didn't talk for a while, letting the gentle hum of the town fill the silence. Children chased each other under the glow of a bakery sign. A couple shared an umbrella as they exited a bookstore. A musician strummed a soft melody near a corner cafe, the notes drifting lazily between the buildings. Alexander took it all in: the laughter, the quiet, the humanity of it. It was painfully, beautifully ordinary, something he had never let himself experience. "This, your first time in a small town?" Amina asked, glancing at him with a knowing grin. He hesitated. "In a place like this?" "Yes." She tilted her head. "You talk like someone who's always on the move." "Maybe I am." It wasn't a lie. Not really. Amina slowed her pace, studying him with open curiosity. "Where do you live?" His jaw tightened. The truth hovered dangerously close to the surface, threatening to shatter the simplicity of this night. His world was a fortress built on secrecy, negotiations, and expectations. Hers was built on grit, passion, and sincerity. "I live," he began, then softened his tone somewhere too loud, too busy. She considered that. "And you came all the way out here to escape?" "Maybe," he murmured. "Maybe I didn't know what I was escaping until I arrived." Her lips parted slightly, surprise. Maybe something else, but she didn't press him further. Amina was many things, but intrusive was not one of them. She simply nodded and gestured toward a narrow street glowing with warm light. "This way." They walked until the smell of pastries greeted them. A small bakery, its windows fogged with warmth, stood at the corner. Amina greeted the elderly man behind the counter by name, and the exchange was filled with easy banter and genuine fondness. Alexander watched her, feeling something tighten behind his ribs. She moved through this world with an effortless sincerity he had never known. People loved her instantly, instinctively, as if she carried a small son around with her. He ordered whatever she recommended. When they sat by the window, he watched the reflection of her smile in the glass, more than he watched the street. "It's strange," she said suddenly. "You're really not like I expected." "How so? I don't know." She tapped her fork lightly against her plate, eyes lifting to meet his. "You look like someone with 1,000 problems, but you talk like someone who's searching." Alexander's chest tightened, a quiet ache threading through him. "Maybe I am searching," he said softly, "for something I didn't know I was missing." Amina's breath caught so faint he almost missed it. A flush crept across her cheeks, subtle but unmistakable. She looked away first. After they finished eating, she led him through the town square. Lanterns hung from wires overhead, swaying gently with the breeze. A group of teenagers played cards on a bench. A dog barked happily at the scent of roasting chestnuts. And then they reached the old bridge. It arched over a narrow river, water glistening under the moon. Amina leaned her arms on the railing, gazing down at the ripples. "It's quiet here," she said. "Helps me think." Alexander joined her, the cool metal railing pressing against his palms. The air around them shifted, slowed, thickened. The breeze tugged at Amina's curls, brushing them across her cheek. She didn't move them immediately, lost in thought. The moment felt suspended, delicate, perfectly balanced on the edge of something new. "You know," she said, voice softer now, "I don't usually spend my nights walking around town with strangers." "Am I still a stranger?" he asked. She paused, looked at him. Really looked. "No," she whispered. His heart stumbled, actually stumbled. Her gaze held warmth, curiosity, hesitation, and something he couldn't quite name. Something fragile and emerging, something that mirrored the heat building in his chest. The world around them shrank to the width of the bridge. The sound of the river dulled. Even the night seemed to lean closer. Alexander exhaled slowly. "Amina," she replied without turning her head. "Yes, I've never met anyone like you." The words came from somewhere deeper than intention. They were raw, unpolished, almost too honest, but he didn't take them back. Amina's fingers tightened slightly around the railing. She turned to him, eyes wide, not startled but affected. Her voice trembled just enough to betray what she tried to hide. "That's unfair," she said quietly. "You don't even know me." "I'm trying to," he murmured. "More than I've tried with anyone in a long time." Lightning did not flash. Thunder did not break the sky. But something shifted sharply, irrevocably between them. Amina drew in a soft breath, and Alexander watched her pulse flutter at her throat. The gentle light from the lanterns reflected in her eyes, making them shimmer like ripples on dark water. This was no longer the fragile spark from earlier. This was warmth, turning into heat. Curiosity turning into longing. Stillness turning into gravity. Amina stepped back first, sensing the edge they were approaching. But she didn't look away. "Let's head back," she whispered. "It's getting late." They walked side by side, hands never touching, but the space between them charged alive, whispering with "what if." And as they neared the garage, one truth settled deep in Alexander's bones. The risk wasn't in staying too long. The risk was in leaving too soon. Because tonight, on a quiet street in a small forgotten town with lantern light catching the curve of Amina's smile, he realized he didn't want to escape his life anymore. He wanted to escape to something, or someone. And for the first time in years, the path he wanted didn't lead toward power. It led to her. Days passed, but Alexander found himself measuring time not by meetings reports or market hours, but by the distance between each visit back to the small town. At first he told himself it was coincidence. A quick drive to check on the car. A follow-up about the part that might need replacing. A routine inspection, he claimed, was important. But neither the part nor the inspection mattered. What mattered, what pulled him back every time, was the soft glow he saw in Amina's eyes when she noticed him walking in. The way her smile always began subtly tugging gently at the corner of her lips as if she were trying to hide it, or the way her voice changed, just a little warmer, lighter, whenever she said his name. His assistant was the first to notice his absences, then the board, then the press secretary, who couldn't understand why Alexander Hayes, the famously disciplined CEO, kept rearranging meetings with foreign investors only to disappear into an unnamed location. Alexander ignored them all. Every time he returned to that garage with the hanging lamp and mismatched tools, the noise of his life fell away. The carefully built walls around his heart walls, people feared, respected, and whispered about, had begun to crack from the moment he met her. Now they weren't just cracking, they were melting. Amina pretended not to notice the excuses he gave, but she wasn't foolish. She saw the way his gaze lingered on her, felt the silence between them grow too heavy to be coincidence. There was a warmth in him now, subtle, quiet, but real, and dangerously contagious. Inside her, something stirred. Something she wasn't ready to call love, but couldn't deny resembled longing. One evening after closing the garage, she surprised him. "Come with me," she said simply. "Where?" Alexander asked, intrigued. "You'll see." She tossed her jacket over her shoulder and started walking toward the outskirts of town. Alexander followed, feeling oddly breathless. The sun had already dipped behind the hills, leaving streaks of violet and gold across the sky. The air smelled of pine and cooling earth. They climbed a small hill overlooking the valley. The path was uneven, studded with wildflowers and soft patches of moss. Amina moved with ease, her laughter drifting behind her, when Alexander stumbled slightly on a root. "You all right?" she teased. "Perfect," he replied, though his heart was pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the climb. When they reached the top, the view stole his breath. The town below shimmered with scattered lights, each one flickering gently like candles. Above them stretched a vast sky, deep and boundless, studded with stars that glowed like ancient embers. Amina lowered herself onto the grass, patting the space beside her. "Sit. It's better from here." Alexander sat, close, but not too close. Still the scent of her lavender warm metal. Something inherently hers drifted toward him, stirring the quiet storm in his chest. Amina leaned back on her elbows, eyes fixed on the sky. "Whenever life gets heavy," she said softly, "I come here. Makes everything feel manageable." Alexander followed her gaze. The stars seemed brighter here, bolder, as if freed from the competition of the city's artificial lights. "You like stargazing," she said, more statement than question. "I didn't," he admitted. "Not until—" He stopped, aware. The next words teetered on the edge of confession. Amina turned her head, meeting his eyes. The breeze lifted her curls, brushing them across her cheek. Not until she prompted gently. Alexander inhaled. There were truths he had never said aloud, truths he himself had only begun to understand. "Not until I saw them with you," he said. Not as a tease, not as a line, but as the simple, unvarnished truth. Amina's breath caught. She turned away, though the faint color rising on her cheeks betrayed her. Silence settled around them, warm, comfortable, and charged with something neither dared name. After a moment, he let his fingers inch closer to hers. not touching just close enough for her to feel the invitation. She didn't pull away. Their hands hovered together, barely brushing. The air between them seemed to vibrate. Alexander's pulse pounded in his ears. "Amina," he said quietly. She looked at him again, this time without retreat, without any shield at all. Her eyes were softer than he had ever seen, filled with curiosity, possibility, and a flicker of fear that mirrored his own. He lifted his hand slightly, hesitating, waiting, offering. Amina placed her hand atop his, light, trembling, deliberate. Something inside him unraveled. He turned his hand, threading their fingers together gently. Her skin was warm, softer than he expected, but her grip was steady, like she was holding on to something she wasn't ready to lose. The stars above seemed to tilt. "You're not what I expected," she whispered. "What did you expect?" She considered. "Someone passing through. Someone I'd forget tomorrow." And now he asked. She swallowed. "Now, I'm not sure I can." Alexander's heart lurched, sharp, painful, beautiful. He shifted closer. The world shrank to the warmth of her skin, the smell of wild grass, the hush of her breath. When he reached up to tuck a curl behind her ear, she closed her eyes, just briefly accepting, leaning into the touch. "Amina," he murmured. She opened her eyes. What he saw there, tenderness, longing, fear, hope, all of it pushed him past the edge he'd been holding on to. He leaned in, slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, searching. A question more than an answer. Then Amina's fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer, and something tightened in his chest. Heat surged through him. Not the consuming kind he was used to in tense negotiations, but something gentler, sweeter, like a fire that had been waiting for years just to find oxygen. Amina's lips were warm, tasting faintly of mint, and something he couldn't name, but already knew he'd crave. She trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear. It was surrender. When they finally pulled apart, the night seemed too quiet, holding its breath with them. Amina rested her forehead against his shoulder, trying to steady herself. "That was," she whispered. He touched her cheek gently. "Yes." A soft laugh escaped her. Not nervous, not embarrassed, but unexpectedly full of wonder. "You make things dangerous. You know," she murmured. Alexander's brow furrowed. "Dangerous." She nodded, tracing patterns on his sleeve. "You feel like a choice. A big one. One that could change everything." He understood exactly what she meant. He felt it too. The shift in the air. The gravity pulling him toward her. And yet, there was a shadow in his chest. A truth he hadn't told. A life she didn't know about. A life that could hurt her. He exhaled slowly, letting the conflict twist inside him. Tonight wasn't the night to break the fragile magic with confessions. But the guilt bit into him nonetheless. "I don't want to be dangerous to you," he said quietly. Amina looked up at him, eyes steady. Maybe danger isn't always something to avoid. His heart lurched. A wind swept across the hill, wrapping them in its cool embrace. The stars shimmered above, as though blessing the moment. They stayed like that. Hands entwined shoulders, touching breaths, mingling as the night settled deeper around them. And long after they walked back down the hill, Alexander knew one thing, with absolute terrifying certainty. Tonight wasn't just a kiss. It wasn't just a spark. It was a turning point, because he wasn't falling anymore. He had already fallen, and beneath that starlit sky, a new truth bloomed. If Amina found out who he truly was, the world he came from, the empire he led, the consequences of loving a man like him, she might run. But if he didn't tell her, He might lose her anyway. The sweetness of the night lingered on his lips. But so did the first sting of fear. For a brief golden stretch of days, Alexander lived in a world suspended between reality and dream. Every stolen hour with Amina on that hillside stayed with him long after he returned to the city. Her laugh, soft, unguarded, echoed through boardrooms. The warmth of her hand lingered on his skin, even as he signed contracts worth millions. The kiss they shared beneath the stars, replayed like a memory he never wanted to escape. For the first time in years, he felt light, alive. And he didn't care who noticed. But the world had teeth, and it always bit down hard on a man like him. The storm arrived on an ordinary morning. His phone buzzed before dawn first once, then continuously over and over. Notifications piling up so fast, the screen froze. Calls from partners, messages from executives, alerts from his PR team. He didn't answer any of them. But when he saw the headline flashing across a news banner, his breath lodged in his throat. Billionaire Alexander Hayes, spotted with mystery woman. Could this be his secret girlfriend? Cold-hearted CEO. Melts for small-town mechanic, who is she? Internet digs up details on the woman seen with Hayes. And then the pictures. Clear as day, even in grainy night lighting. Him and Amina walking side by side. Her laughing at something he said. Their hands inches apart. A moment frozen in time twisted into spectacle. Someone had followed them. Someone had sold the story. His heart slammed painfully against his ribs as he scrolled. Then the comments appeared. He didn't have the strength to keep reading. But he had to. She is obviously using him. Gold digger. Classic. She looks so out of place. Why would a billionaire go for that? Watch her milk him dry. A chill ripped through him. It wasn't only cruelty. It was violence aimed squarely at the woman he cared about. Alexander grabbed his keys and bolted out the door. The town was different that morning. The warmth he associated with it, the laughter, the slow rhythm, the gentle voices had evaporated into something harsher. The streets buzzed with whispers, speculation camera flashes. Reporters stood clustered near the garage elbows, bumping microphones raised like weapons. The moment they saw him, they surged forward. Mr. Hayes, is it true you've been secretly dating her? Are you planning to buy her business? Did you manipulate her into a relationship? Is this a publicity stunt? He shoved past them, jaw clenched, pulse roaring in his ears. They were gnats, nothing more. But the damage they left behind was anything but small. Inside the garage, Amina sat on a low stool in the corner of the room, hands gripping her knees so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her hair was mussed, as if she'd been pulling at it. Her eyes, those deep, steady eyes, were red, swollen, defeated. When she looked up at him, something inside Alexander cracked open so violently he almost fell. He walked to her, every step heavy with dread. Amina, he breathed. She blinked, and a tear slid down her cheek. Silent, unannounced, devastating. Did you know? She whispered. The question pierced him. I swear no. I didn't know anyone followed us. She gave a small, broken laugh. Of course they followed you. You. She didn't say his name like she used to, a gentle shape on her tongue. She said it like he was a stranger. He kneeled in front of her. I can handle this. I'll shut it down. But she flinched. Actually flinched. Alexander. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. Do you understand what this means? What my life looks like now? She motioned weakly toward the window. He turned. Outside, reporters were pressed against the glass, breath steaming the panes, lenses glinting like sharp eyes waiting to tear something apart. Amina, please, he said, turning back, his hands closing into fists. Let me fix this. That's the problem, she whispered. I don't want to be something you have to fix. He froze. She took a shaky breath. Customers called this morning to cancel appointments. People look at me differently. They think I'm... Her voice broke. They think I used you, or that you paid me, or that I'm some project you're working on. He reached for her hand. She pulled it back. That hurt more than anything the world had ever thrown at him. Amina, he said quietly, fighting to breathe. None of that is true. I will stand by you. I will protect you. Stop, she said sharply, surprising them both. Tears spilled again, faster this time. That's exactly why I can't do this. His pulse stumbled. What do you mean? His voice was barely sound. She looked at him with eyes full of trembling heartbreak. Look at the difference between us, Alexander. Look at what happens when someone like me is near someone like you. You're blaming yourself for their cruelty, he hissed. Amina, no. They're the ones wrong. No, she cut in. This is not about cruelty. This is about power. She pressed her hand to her chest. Your world could crush mine, even if you don't want it to. He felt the words slice him open. I don't care what the world thinks, he said fiercely. But I do, she sobbed suddenly, burying her face in her hands. He reached out on instinct, wanting to pull her into him, shield her, hide her from all of it. But she stepped back as if his touch might burn her worse than the world outside. I can't breathe, Alexander, she whispered. Since the article came out, I can't think. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I hear people telling me I don't belong anywhere near you. You belong with me, he said, voice breaking. Do I? She choked out. Or am I just someone who got lucky enough to catch your attention? What happens when this becomes too tiring for you? When your board tells you I'm a liability? When your name is dragged through the mud because of me? Amina wiped her cheeks roughly. I can't be the reason your world falls apart. My world, he echoed, stunned. Amina, you are my... Don't, she said quickly, shaking her head. Don't make it harder. Silence. Painful. Heavy. Unforgiving. She inhaled shakily. We need to end this. His vision blurred. The room tilted. He felt something sharp and cold lodge beneath his ribs. End, he repeated, voice hollow. Her eyes were an ocean of sorrow. Before it destroys us both. Destroy. Us. 2 words that made his throat constrict until he thought he might suffocate. Amina, he whispered, stepping forward. This is not how our story ends. But she backed away again, tears streaming freely now. It has to, she said. I'm not strong enough for your life, and you shouldn't have to give up everything for mine. He reached out one last time. Her gaze dropped to his hand. Then she closed her eyes, and that was answer enough. When she finally turned her back to him, the silence roared louder than any storm outside. His breath faltered. His legs felt weak. For a long moment he could only watch her shoulders tremble, wishing desperately that he could make her see the truth. But the truth had never mattered less. Fear had already won. And so, with his heart breaking in a way he didn't know was possible, he walked to the door. Rain poured from the sky, drowning the noise of reporters, drowning the sound of the world. But it couldn't drown the sound of her quiet sob inside the garage. Alexander stepped out into the storm without an umbrella, without hesitation, without caring that each drop felt like a blade against his skin. The heavy metal door slid shut behind him with a final echoing thud. He stood in the downpour, long after the reporters had run for cover, long after the world dimmed into gray, long after he could no longer feel his hands. He stood there until he understood the full truth of what had happened. He had conquered markets, defeated rivals, built an empire, brick by relentless brick. But he had never known loss. Not like this. Not until now. And as the rain soaked him to the bone, Alexander realized, if heartbreak had a sound, it was the silence of the woman he loved, walking away from him. The storm outside mirrored the one closing in on Alexander from every direction. By the time he reached the office that morning, the crisis had erupted into a full-blown wildfire. His board of directors filled the long glass conference room like vultures circling a wounded animal. Papers strewn across the table displayed headlines, opinion pieces, financial projections, each one more venomous than the last. The moment he stepped inside the room, fell into a brittle silence. Mr. Hayes, the chairman, began, his tone clipped and icy. "We need to address the situation." Alexander removed his coat rein, still dripping from the hem, and tossed it across the back of his chair. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He simply stared at the table, the pictures of him and Amina, the words scandal, reckless bad optics, flashing like accusation after accusation. One director cleared her throat. "Your personal entanglements are jeopardizing the company. Investors are nervous. The press is circling. And the public." "Enough," Alexander said quietly. But the chairman pressed on as if deaf to the warning in his voice. "You will make a statement today. You will clarify that you have no involvement with this woman, and you will distance yourself publicly. This is the only acceptable path forward." Alexander finally lifted his gaze. The board stiffened. They were used to his coldness. They were not used to the fire simmering underneath. "I will do no such thing." The director at his right adjusted his glasses nervously. "Alexander, think rationally. This woman is—" "Say her name?" Alexander snapped. A tense beat of silence. The director faltered. "Amina." Alexander's jaw clenched. "She is not a liability." "With all due respect," another chimed in. "She already is." He said nothing, but there was a tremor beneath his ribs so fierce it almost took his breath away. "It would be best for you and for this company," the chairman insisted, "if you sever ties immediately, cleanly, strategically." Their words swirled around him like smoke. He felt lightheaded, off balance, as if the walls that had once protected him were now closing in. Every argument they made was built on logic, efficiency, practicality. But his world had shifted. Logic no longer held the same weight it used to. He finally spoke, voice low and dangerous. "My relationship is not a matter for this board." The chairman exhaled sharply. "You are the face of this entire corporation. Everything you do reflects on us, including your poor judgment." Poor judgment. The phrase landed like a blow. For years, Alexander had built his life on precision, every choice measured, every calculation flawless. But the one choice he made for himself, for his heart, was now being dissected by people who had never known anything beyond power and profit. The chairman leaned forward. "We are giving you an ultimatum. Address the scandal. End it, or risk consequences." Alexander stared at them, and for the first time, the empire he had built felt foreign, cold, hollow, a gilded cage masquerading as success. He inhaled shakily. "I'm leaving." The board exchanged shocked glances. "Leaving the meeting?" "No," he said, turning toward the door. "Leaving the building." He didn't wait for their protest. He didn't care. The only thing he cared about was the ache clawing through his chest, the knowledge that while he sat here arguing with men who didn't matter, Amina was alone, hurting, drowning under the weight of a world she never asked to be part of. He walked out without another word. Rain hammered the windshield as he drove harder and colder than before. Night had fallen, wrapping the world in a dark, restless hush. He took the turns faster than he should have. He didn't care. Amina was all he could think about, her face pale with exhaustion, her eyes swollen from tears he hadn't been able to wipe away, her voice breaking as she pushed him from her life. He gripped the steering wheel, tighter, knuckles whitening. The city vanished behind him as he followed the winding road back to the small town, the town that had felt more like home than any place he'd ever known. But tonight it looked different, shuttered, silent, as if hiding from him. The garage lights were off. The sign above the door had been removed. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but the storm. Alexander stepped into the rain and walked toward the entrance. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He knocked. Once. Twice. Again, harder each time. "Amina," he called, voice raw. "I know you're there." The only answer was rain, pounding on the pavement. He pressed his forehead against the door, breathing hard, soaked to the bone. His suit clung to him like a second skin, heavy with water, heavy with fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of not deserving her. Fear that the storm outside wasn't half as violent as the one tearing him apart inside. "Amina," he said again, softer now. "Please." Still nothing. Lightning cut through the sky, illuminating the empty street. And then, a faint click. The door cracked open. Amina stood in the narrow gap framed by darkness. Her curls were damp, her cheeks blotchy from crying. She clutched her sweater tightly, as if holding herself together. The sight of her nearly brought him to his knees. "Amina." She shook her head immediately, eyes shimmering with anguish. "You shouldn't be here. I had to come." "No." Her voice trembled. "Not tonight." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his lashes. "I won't leave you alone in this." Her breath hitched. "Alexander, you don't understand. Every time you come back, it gets harder. It hurts more." His chest constricted. "It hurts because you're pushing me away. It hurts," she whispered, tears spilling again, "because I'm trying to protect you." He reached out slowly, gently, and rested his hands on her shoulders. She didn't pull away this time. She only shook under his touch, like a fragile flame caught between burning and going out. "Amina," he said, voice breaking, "I don't need protection from you." She squeezed her eyes shut. "But you need protection from the world. And I can't give you that. I can't fight the same battles you do." "You don't have to," he whispered fiercely. "Let me fight for you." Her eyes snapped open, tortured. "And what happens when fighting for me costs you everything? Your company, your reputation, your future. I won't be the reason your life falls apart." He leaned closer, rain dripping from his jaw onto her skin. "My life means nothing without you in it." Her breath shuddered. Her resolve faltered. He could feel it. But then her expression contorted fear, longing, heartbreak colliding all at once. "Stop," she whispered. "You're making this worse." How he pleaded. "By telling you the truth. If you keep saying things like that," she said, voice collapsing, "I won't be able to let you go. Then don't." Lightning lit the sky again. Their breaths mingled. The world narrowed to the space between them, the last fragile thread of something beautiful and breaking. Amina took a trembling step back. "I'm afraid," she confessed, voice barely audible. "Not of you, but of who I might become if I stay. Of how small I'll feel next to your world. Of how easily I could lose myself." He shook his head, rainwater flying. "You could never be small. But I feel small now," she whispered. "And that's the part I can't live with." The words punched through him, deep, precise, devastating. Before he could respond, she pushed gently against his chest. "Go home, Alexander." He didn't move. "Go," she said again, voice cracking, "before I break completely." He held her gaze for a long, brutal moment. Then slowly, painfully, he stepped back. The door closed between them. And this time, it wasn't the storm that made him shiver. It was the realization that love wasn't always lost through betrayal. Sometimes it was lost through fear, through wounds the world inflicted faster than two hearts could heal. As Alexander walked back into the rain, a single truth carved itself into him. Words would never be enough. Not anymore. If he wanted to hold on to her, he would have to fight. Not in boardrooms, not with power or influence, but with action, with sacrifice, with proof of a love stronger than fear. And as the thunder growled overhead, Alexander made a silent vow. He would prove it, whatever the cost. Morning light filtered through the glass facade of the Hayes Global headquarters, but inside the building, the atmosphere felt nothing like daylight. It was electric, tense, expectant. Word had spread like wildfire. Alexander Hayes was calling a press conference. Not his PR team, not the board, not the crisis management advisors scrambling since dawn. Him, the man who avoided media glare more than any other CEO on the Fortune 500 list. The man who valued silence over spin. The man who hid his personal life with relentless precision. Reporters flocked to the building in droves. Cameras filled the atrium. Social media exploded with speculation. Was he stepping down? Was he in trouble? Was this a corporate restructuring? No one guessed the truth. Not even the board members, who arrived in a panic, whispering urgently to one another as they took their places behind the podium. When Alexander stepped onto the stage, a hush fell instantly over the crowd. He wore a black suit tailored so sharply it could cut glass. His posture was straight, controlled, but his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, always so cold, now held a clarity that vibrated with emotion. He didn't wait for questions. He didn't shuffle notes. He didn't clear his throat. He simply gripped the microphone, leaned slightly forward, and said loudly enough for every camera to capture the tremor in his voice. "I love her." Silence slammed across the room. It felt like the world stopped breathing. The board members behind him stiffened in horror. Investors in the front row exchanged frantic, confused glances. A few reporters recovered enough to raise their cameras higher, fingers trembling with anticipation. But Alexander kept speaking calmly, clearly, devastatingly honest. "I am in love with Amina Johnson," he continued. "And I'm not here to deny it. I'm here to explain it." A single camera flash lit his face harsh and bright, but he didn't blink. When people saw pictures of us together, they didn't know the context. They didn't understand who she is. He paused, letting the words settle. "Let me be perfectly clear." His voice dropped, rich with conviction. "She is extraordinary." A ripple traveled through the room. Surprise, confusion, disbelief. Alexander continued. "Amina is strong. She is brilliant. She built her business from nothing. She makes the world better just by showing up. She asks for nothing, expects nothing. She didn't know who I was when we met, and when she found out, she didn't want anything from me except honesty." Another pause. A breath. A crack of vulnerability in his tone. "And when she realized her presence in my life might harm my company, she walked away to protect me. Not because I asked her to, because she is that kind of person." His fingers tightened around the microphone. "That is the woman you called opportunistic." He scanned the room, meeting dozens of stunned eyes. "That is the woman you mocked and dissected online. That is the woman the world tried to tear apart without knowing anything about her." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the front rows. Alexander stepped forward, shadows cutting across his cheekbones. "I'm both a man and a CEO. As a CEO, I understand the stakes. As a man," his voice broke just slightly, "I can't lose her." The world tilted. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer. "So I'm putting an end to the speculation. There was no scandal, no ulterior motive, no manipulation. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of his next words steady him. Amina inspired me to become someone better. She made me see life in color again. She reminded me that there are things worth fighting for outside these walls. Behind him, the board exchanged alarmed looks, but no one dared interrupt. And if anyone believes my company can't withstand the truth that its CEO is in love, Alexander added, voice sharpening just enough to sound like the commander-in-chief he was known to be. Then they underestimate both me and this corporation. Silence. Heavy. Awed. Then a frenzy. Hands shot into the air. Questions erupted at once. Cameras flashed like lightning. But Alexander held up a hand. One more thing. The crowd quieted, breathless. I will not be answering questions about her. She deserves peace after everything that's been done to her. If you want statements, come to me, not her. If you want quotes, come to me, not her. Leave her alone. With that, he stepped back from the microphone, nodded once, and walked off stage, ignoring the board members scrambling after him. The conference erupted into chaos behind him. The world reacted instantly. Some applauded, some criticized, some mocked, some swooned. But the most astonishing shift wasn't the noise. It was the silence that followed in its wake. Within hours, hashtags in support of Amina began to trend. Women in mechanical and engineering fields shared stories of their struggles, naming Amina as a symbol of resilience. Local businesses posted messages of solidarity. Articles sprang up analyzing how sexism had shaped the initial backlash. Influencers with millions of followers encouraged people to rethink their biases. And miraculously, shares of Hays Global soared. The board, once pale with panic, now wore relieved, almost sheepish expressions. Brilliant strategic pivot, they whispered in hallways. As expected from Hays, he knows how to turn a scandal into an asset. But Alexander didn't care about any of that. He only cared about one thing: Amina. Miles away in the small town where the storm had first begun, Amina sat in the dim back room of the garage laptop, open on her knees. She hadn't planned to watch the press conference. She'd promised herself she wouldn't. Her heart was too raw, her body too tired, her soul too bruised. But when the notifications wouldn't stop, when customers began sending messages of support, when people she'd never met tagged her in posts, defending her, curiosity broke through the fog of her grief. And she clicked. She watched Alexander step onto the stage, watched him grip the microphone, watched him say the words that made her whole world tilt on its axis. I love her. Amina covered her mouth breath, leaving her in a silent rush. Then she listened. Every word, every confession, every truth he bared for her sake. She had believed Alexander lived in a world so far from hers that bridging it was impossible. She had believed she wasn't strong enough to face the weight of his life, but he had shouldered the weight himself. Publicly, fearlessly, beautifully. Tears blurred her vision, trailing down her cheeks. He hadn't defended her by erasing her. He hadn't protected her by hiding her. He had lifted her, honored her, placed her story in the world with pride instead of shame. For the first time since the scandal began, hope, small, trembling, fragile, rose in her chest. But beneath it, deeper, hotter, more dangerous, lay something else: longing and love. A love she had tried to bury under fear, but which now clawed its way back to the surface, furious and undeniable. She pressed a trembling hand over her heart. Oh, Alexander. Her voice broke, because she finally understood something she had been too afraid to admit before. He hadn't just fought for her. He had chosen her, against the world, against logic, against every piece of himself trained to choose power over vulnerability. For the first time, she wanted to choose him back. Far across town, Alexander stood alone in his office, overlooking the skyline, unaware of the shift occurring miles away in Amina's chest. He stared out the window, jaw tight, heart racing with uncertainty. But in the quiet of that moment, a single fragile thought flickered through him. Maybe, just maybe, she would forgive him. The thought didn't bring relief. It brought hope. And hope, he realized with a breathless, terrifying clarity, was more powerful than any victory he had ever won. The next day felt impossibly long for Alexander. All night he had replayed the press conference in his head, her face somewhere far away, watching him bear a truth he had never spoken aloud to anyone. He didn't know if she would accept it. He didn't know if he deserved her forgiveness. All he knew was that he couldn't stay away another second. So before sunrise, he drove back to the small town, the roads still wet from the night rain. The clouds had scattered, leaving the sky washed clean. Everything felt quieter, expectant, like the world itself was holding its breath. As he stepped out of the car, his pulse hammered in his ears. He knocked once. The door opened immediately. Amina stood there, framed by the warm glow of the garage lights behind her. Her curls were loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, those deep, unguarded eyes, held a mixture of fear, longing, and something gentler than either of those. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. "Hi," Alexander said softly. It was all he could manage. Amina swallowed her breath, hitching just slightly. "Hi." Her voice wavered, but there was no coldness, no distance, only a trembling warmth that made his chest tighten painfully. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder thick, carefully bound. "Before you say anything, I need to show you something." Amina hesitated, then took it. Her fingers brushed his in the process, sending a familiar spark through him. She didn't react outwardly, but her breath deepened. She opened the folder. Her eyes widened immediately. Inside were architectural sketches, operational plans, projected budgets, a logo at the top, a name written in elegant script. Amina Technical Institute, a training center for women in engineering and mechanics. She flipped through the pages slowly, her lips parting in disbelief. "Alexander, what is this?" "A future," he said simply. "Your future." She looked up sharply. This is enormous. I could never." "You won't have to do it alone," he cut in gently. "I'm not buying anything. I'm supporting something. Your dream. The dream you told me about the first night we met." Her eyes trembled. "I never asked for this. I know. That's why I trust you with it." He stepped closer, not too close, but enough that she could feel his sincerity in the space between them. "You didn't follow me for money. You didn't want my name. You pushed me away because you were afraid of hurting me." He paused, voice thickening. "But the truth is, Amina, I'm the one hurting without you." The silence stretched, delicate, shimmering, alive. Amina closed the folder carefully, as though afraid she might damage something precious. When she looked back at him, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me." He took a breath, nerves crackling beneath his skin. "Just give me a chance. One more chance to stand beside you, not as a CEO, not as a headline, just as a man who loves you." Amina's lips parted, but no words came out. Her chest rose and fell in unsteady waves. "Alexander." She shook her head lightly. "You don't understand. I'm afraid." His heart lurched. "Of what?" "Of you," she admitted in a whisper. "Of how much I feel. Of how quickly you slipped under my skin. It scares me because I've never let anyone close enough to break me before." He stepped closer this time, slowly giving her every opportunity to turn away. She didn't move. "And you think you could break me?" he murmured. She blinked, confused. He lifted his hand, and with the gentlest touch, brushed a raindrop from her cheek, his thumb grazing the warm curve of her skin. "You already did," he whispered, "when you closed that door." Her breath hitched, tears spilling freely now. "But you also made me whole again yesterday," he continued. "When I spoke the truth in front of the world, I wasn't thinking about the company or the board. I was thinking about you, about the way you looked at me on that hill under the stars, about the way you made everything feel real for the first time in years." He swallowed hard. "You are not a threat to my life, Amina. You are the only part of it that feels honest." Her face crumpled, not in despair, but in the soft, overwhelming ache of someone whose heart had been fighting itself for too long. A warm breeze rustled through the leaves outside, carrying the scent of damp earth and gasoline. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the clouds, casting a golden hue over everything. Amina stepped forward until there was almost no space between them. Her voice shook. "Alexander, I don't know if I'm enough for your world." "You're more than enough," he whispered back. "You're the only part of my world that makes sense." She pressed her lips together, tears falling faster now. He could see her resolve breaking, melting, softening under the weight of everything neither of them could deny anymore. And then finally, Amina let out a soft, choked sound and threw herself into his arms. He caught her instantly, arms wrapping around her with a desperate tenderness. He held her close, closer than he ever had, his face burying in her curls as she trembled against him. "Amina," he breathed, voice fractured. "I've missed you." Her fingers fisted in the back of his shirt as though afraid he might disappear. "I'm sorry," she cried against his chest. "I'm so sorry." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "No more apologies," he said, brushing her cheeks with his thumbs. "No more running." She nodded through tears. "I love you," she whispered finally, openly, beautifully. A sound escaped him, half relief, half disbelief. His forehead pressed to hers, their breaths mixing. "I love you too," he murmured. "From the moment my car died in front of your shop, maybe even before that." She laughed weakly through her tears, and the sound was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky a deep amber. The golden light spilled over them, two silhouettes locked together, two lives intertwining at last. Behind them, the signless garage stood quiet and small. Before them, a future glowed bright and terrifying and full of promise. Their foreheads remained pressed together as the wind lifted Amina's curls, brushing them gently across Alexander's jaw. He kissed her, then soft at first, then deeper, sweeter, with all the emotion he had held back for too long. The world narrowed to the warmth of her skin, the salt of her tears, the sound of her breath catching. He felt her heart against his, steady, strong, finally aligned with his. In that moment, he knew. This wasn't the end of their story. It wasn't even the middle. It was the beginning. A new chapter born from hardship, strengthened by truth, bound by love. A future not built on power or money or image, but on something far more fragile and far more enduring each other. And as the last light of day painted their silhouettes in gold, Amina whispered against his lips, "Let's begin again." 2 years had passed since that sunset, since Alexander and Amina stood on the hill where their story had begun, promising each other a future neither had dared dream of before. 2 years since fear gave way to courage, since distance surrendered to devotion, since two people from different worlds stepped into the same horizon. Their wedding had been small, deliberately intimate, held on that same hilltop beneath a velvet sky, scattered with silver stars. Only a handful of friends attended, those who loved without judgment. Nature was their cathedral, the night sky their witness. And when Alexander kissed Amina as the moon rose, he knew he had finally come home. Now that home had grown even brighter. Their cottage on the outskirts of town, a cozy, sunlit place built with equal parts warmth and stubborn teamwork, echoed daily with soft coos and bubbling laughter from the couple's biggest blessings. A pair of 6-month-old twins with eyes like constellations and smiles that softened even the darkest nights. Elias, the boy, with Alexander's deep blue eyes, but Amina's radiant smile. Amara, the girl with Amina's dark, brilliant gaze, but Alexander's quiet composure. 2 little stars. 2 tiny heartbeats that had rearranged every priority in their parents' lives. That afternoon, the house glowed with the golden light of late daylight filtering through the big front window. Alexander stood near it, holding Elias against his chest. The baby gripped his father's collar, with tiny fingers babbling nonsense syllables that sounded like the beginning of a secret language. Amina walked toward them. Amara nestled against her shoulder, curls bouncing lightly as she moved. Motherhood had given her a different kind of beauty, softer, calmer, yet infinitely more powerful. She was the same woman who once fought the world on her own, but now she fought with someone. And that made all the difference. They stood side by side before the window, as the sun dipped toward the edge of the world. The light washed over the 4 of them, turning the room into an amber sanctuary. Dust motes danced in the air like glitter suspended in honey. Outside, the evening wind rustled through the tall grass. Amina watched the horizon, her cheek resting lightly against the soft hair atop her daughter's head. "Do you remember?" she asked softly, "the night we met?" Alexander let out a gentle breath, his free hand finding hers. "How could I forget?" A faint smile tugged at his lips. "If my car hadn't broken down that night, none of this." He looked at the twins. His entire world, now held in 2 tiny bodies, would exist. Amina turned her gaze up to him, eyes shimmering. Maybe fate knows exactly what it's doing. He leaned down to kiss her forehead. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just simple, pure affection. But the intimacy of it sent warmth through her chest. As she shifted Amara from one arm to the other, Alexander reached out to brush a loose curl from her cheek. He had fallen in love with her fire first, then with her courage, then with her softness. But it was her constancy, the quiet strength she carried in her bones, that made him believe in a kind of forever he had previously dismissed as fantasy. For a while, they simply watched the sunset paint the world in shades of flame. Elias squealed in delight, reaching for the golden light beyond the window. Amara gurgled happily, grabbing at Amina's necklace. Their little family felt whole, rooted, peaceful. And yet beneath the sweetness of the moment, a quiet truth pulsed through Alexander. He was a different man now, not because he had abandoned his ambition. He still worked, still led, still wielded power with an edge of precision, but because every decision was made with purpose, with mindfulness, with consideration of the home waiting for him at the end of each day. He no longer lived to build an empire. He lived to build a life. Outside the window, the sign of the newly expanded institute glowed against the gathering dusk. Amina Technical Academy, where women rise and shine. It was Amina's dream brought to life, and over 2 years it had grown into something incredible. Girls from across the region came to train to learn engineering mechanics, automotive diagnostics. Some had struggled with finances, others with prejudice. But here, every single one found a place to stand tall. Alexander had funded it, yes. But it was Amina who breathed soul into it. Every day, she walked into those classrooms with fire in her eyes, and every day, she walked out leaving sparks inside dozens of young women who saw her not just as a mentor, but as proof that they could rewire their own world. Alexander watched her as she cradled Amara, rocking lightly from side to side. The same strength she gave her students, she now gave their children. And him. "You built something incredible," he said quietly. She smiled without looking away from the sunset. "We built it." He chuckled softly. "No, I built the building. You built the purpose." Amina nudged him with her shoulder. "Maybe that's why it works." The moment settled between them, tender and weightless. Outside, the wind carried faint laughter from the academy's evening class students, finishing repairs, engines humming in the background. Life continued beyond their window, but it felt beautifully distant. Amina's voice softened. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been every day?" He shifted Elias onto his other arm and reached for her waist with his free hand. "But then I remember that the hardest paths are often the ones worth taking." He pressed a kiss to Amara's tiny hand. "And you were worth every storm." She inhaled sharply, emotion flickering across her face. "Alexander." He met her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For choosing me. For choosing this. For choosing us." He traced his thumb over the back of her hand. "I didn't choose you." Amina blinked, startled. "You chose me," he said softly. "The moment you opened that garage door after the press conference. The moment you let me fight for you. The moment you let yourself love me back." Her breath caught. Tears welled. Elias cooed, reaching toward her face, sensing her emotion. She laughed through tears, kissing his tiny fingers. Their family, messy, beautiful, miraculous, felt more whole with every passing second. Alexander drew her closer. She rested her head on his shoulder. Amara nestled between them. The twins babbled softly, lulled by the fading light. Outside, the sun dipped fully below the horizon, leaving streaks of rose and gold behind. A gentle twilight wrapped the house, cocooning the four of them in a warm embrace. Amina spoke first, voice low and trembling with affection. "Do you think the twins will grow up knowing how much they were loved?" Alexander smiled, brushing a hand over Elias's soft hair. "They'll never doubt it, not for a second." The babies giggled in perfect harmony, as if agreeing. Amina leaned closer. "You know, sometimes I still can't believe this is real." Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "It's real. Every bit of it. And lasting," she whispered. He looked at her then with the same certainty he had shown the world the day he confessed everything, but softer, now, deeper, full. "With you," he kissed her gently. "Always." The twins squirmed between them, reaching for each other, tiny hands tangling. Their laughter filled the room again, bright, unrestrained, pure. Two little stars shining in their parents' arms. Amina closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the moment sink into her bones. Outside the academy, lights glowed brighter, the words, "Where women rise and shine," shimmering in the dusk. The legacy they were building stretched beyond business, and headlines it reached into classrooms, futures, and the tiny hands of their children. Inside, Alexander tightened his arm around Amina's waist as Elias nestled sleepily against his chest. Their worlds had once been galaxies apart. Now they orbited the same sun. Different histories, different journeys, one shared destiny. A home built not on power or wealth, but on tenderness, resilience, and love. Amina whispered voice, barely audible. Our little universe. Alexander kissed the top of her head. The brightest one I've ever known. Together with Elias and Amara, curled safely in their arms, they stood before the fading light of day, a family illuminated by love, strong enough to bridge galaxies. No more storms, no more fear, only warmth, a home of 2 stars, and the 2 smaller stars born from them, shining together into the future. The happiness was full, the story complete, and nothing more needed to be added. The end